Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy, The Thrill, and I have decided to do a new segment on my channel. It's going to be every Thursday, no particular time, just when I can find the time to do it. And we are going to travel through the book of Romans. We'll start at chapter 1 till we get to the end. I'm choosing Romans because Romans is the pathway to Christianity. That is the book that many people turn to find out what it takes to be a Christian and the main tenets of what it means. Um, but first, before we get started, in order to understand the text of any chapter in the Bible, you can apply this to any chapter. You need to take time to learn some of the background that pertains to it. The book of Romans, it was a letter written by Paul, and it was a few years into his ministry for sure, because he talks about how he had wanted to, he's been wanting to come visit the church, but has been unable to because he had other obligations at that time. But the book of Romans was to the Roman Catholic Church, which it was a well-established church. This book's a little bit different because he gets into a lot of substance, because he didn't have to go to this church and, talk about how to organize to organize service and spiritual gifts and all the other stuff that he had to address at other churches. This was a well-established church. I mean, it was a Roman Catholic church, so I think it is said that the order of Paul's letters, like if you wanted to know the chronological order, I think Romans, hang on, I'm trying to find it here. Yeah, I can't find it right now. So the Roman Church was, it was a group that had a large Jewish element, but it was also filled with Gentiles who had converted from paganism, um, and there was both free and slaves apparent in there. How the church in Rome was started is, it's kind of unclear. The Roman Catholic view is that Peter founded it. Another view is that the Roman Christians from the Pentecost in Jerusalem made their way there. But it may be simply that several Christian families or groups from Pauline churches in the East in Rome and grew together. They settled there and grew together. So that's just a little bit of background on the book of Romans particularly. And also important to note that Paul, on the road to Damascus, saw Jesus in his physical form, or saw a vision, one of the two. And Paul, his job used to be to go around and round up Christians and bring them to the king so they could be executed. That used to be his job. He persecuted many of Christians. Okay, but when he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus, Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Paul fell to the ground and started worshiping him, and Jesus, decided to use Paul to go around to all the different churches and kind of set the foundations up for Christianity. And I do want to note that although Paul was working under the authority of Jesus Christ, he had the authority per Jesus. Jesus used him for a reason. One of those reasons would be that he knew Paul would be resilient. He was resilient in his quest to gather up Christians, and Jesus needed somebody like that, because we will see in other chapters, and I think a little bit in the book of Romans, that Gentile and Jew, when they were intertwined and grafted in to this new covenant, there was some disputes. And some of the Jews didn't like what Paul had to say, didn't like what Jesus had to say, because it totally went against their beliefs and customs that they had grown accustomed to through the law. Okay? So, and we will get into the law and what that's all about later in the book of Romans. But chapter 1, we'll go ahead and get to it because I'm going to run out of time. Chapter 1, Paul gives his greeting. He says that he is Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ, chosen by God to be an apostle and sent out to preach the good news. Okay, so he was chosen by Jesus to go spread this good news. But oh yeah, what I was trying to say is we got to realize that Paul, some of the things that Paul says, even in this book of Romans, if it's not concerning like the main tenets, it's not, the Old Testament law. It's not, set in stone. Sometimes he just offers suggestions to settle disputes, is what I'm trying to say. So I'll try to point that out whenever I think it's evident, and then you guys can decide for yourselves. The verses I wanted to read, because he gives his introduction, then he talks about the good news, which is Christ died and rose from the dead. He's our gateway to heaven, basically. Is I want to read God's anger at sin. This starts in Romans 1, chapter 18, because I thought this was pretty good. It says, "But God shows his anger from heaven against all the sinful and wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God, but because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky, and though everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. They began to think up their own foolish ideas of what God was like, and as a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious ever-living God, they worshipped idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things that their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God in for a lie. So they worshipped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulge in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with each other, and a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. Since they thought it was foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness: sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malice, behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers and haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand, break their promises. They're heartless and they have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do it. And that's some pretty serious stuff right there. So that's why God abandoned them. You know, we see over and over and over again in the Old Testament where the Jews, you know, they knew God was real. He spoke to them directly in many cases, and yet they still disobeyed him time and time and time again. And that's why some of them, even today, still have the blinders on, because God put blinders on them, and eventually they will be lifted, and that's when, around the time of the second coming, but that's not Romans. We won't get into that. I'm about out of time, so that's all I got for now. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I need subscribers, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Deuces.